What's up, guys? It's me, Umar Tal, back at it again with another video. Alright, so I'm not in the gym. I'm in my bedroom. And why? Because it's getting super cold all of a sudden. It's almost as if it's a new season or something like that, right? But what I'm going to be talking about is combining the best of both worlds, right? Some people, they might only train calisthenics. Some people might only train weights. And you as a beginner, you're like, oh wow, they both look great, but like which one is better to do? Well, guess what, dummy? Combine the two. It's so easy. And I'll explain that to you right now. So I use weights and I use calisthenics, right? So I combine them together. And honestly, it's a great combination, and you can use both of them together very synchronously, right? It goes together, right? A lot of the great old bodybuilders within like the silver era, before they were taking drugs, and the golden era, they use calisthenic movements to develop their physique along with the weighted movements, right? So I'm just gonna break down as what calisthenics is and what weight training is, right? So what is calisthenics? So calisthenics is generally you moving your body through resistance, or using your body as a form of resistance, right, to build muscle, right? So this would kind of be thought of, or maybe not to just build muscle, but to build your body as well in general, like, your heart and lungs, whatever. But people will think of your standard movements like push-ups, pull-ups, bodyweight lunges, bodyweight squats, dips, whatever. But there's also other movements such as like running and jump rope, which is calisthenics. And that's because like not only are you, developing your ligaments and your joints when you're doing like jump roping and running, but you're also developing your heart, and your heart is a muscle. So you can kind of think of it as like that, right? And it requires not that much equipment. Generally people will think like with calisthenics, you don't use that much equipment. You don't have to have access to cables or bars or dumbbells or, whatever the case may be. So what is weight training, right? So weight training is pretty different from calisthenics. So you might be thinking when it comes to weight training, okay, bench, deadlift, whatever the case may be, right? So those movements, you are taking an external weight, an external load, and you're moving it through resistance, right? And by the way, this resistance that I'm saying, it's gravity basically. So when you're doing bench, you're pushing something off of you. When you're doing deadlifts, you are taking something from the ground. And then of course, other movements, like some other barbell movements, some other dumbbell movements. There's like curls and stuff like that. There's tricep extensions, whatever, and then cable movements, stuff like that. That is more of weight training. Before I get into more stuff, I want to kind of clear up a misconception. So generally, people will think calisthenics doesn't get you big, right? People will like start off with calisthenics and they'll feel like, oh, I didn't get big enough, I'm not big enough, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll do weights, and then all of a sudden they think like, oh, that just blew me up, Oh, I just dropped that little baby, kitty calisthenics stuff, and I just started picking weight off the ground, and I just blew up, man. Like, that's a misconception, right? People will think that when it comes to training with calisthenics, you're just doing hundreds and hundreds of reps, and you're not going to failure, you're not training with enough intensity, you're just kind of doing like, little kid stuff or whatever in your bedroom. And then also that people will think that your body weight isn't sufficient enough to inspire muscle growth, right? But that's not the case at all. What happens is that you're not using enough variations, right? You need to use a lot more exercise variations when it comes to calisthenics. And a great way to do that is by using gymnastic rings and, parallel bars or dip bars, whatever the case may be. So that way you can change up the intensity and the variations of those exercises. And then also just simply training with intensity, right? i.e. going to failure, right? Pushing yourself until you can't perform another good quality rep, right? And that's how you gain and grow just with your own body weight. You can do so much just with your own body weight. And I also have a video detailing how to acquire aesthetics with just body weight calisthenics training, which you can check out in my channel. How do I use calisthenics in my training, right? So calisthenics is practically the base of my training. If I were to kind of like describe or detail how my training is, it's like a calisthenics based program, right? So all of my calisthenics movements are like, my big compound movements. So that be like push-ups, that be dips, that be barbell squats. If you didn't know, that still counts. Pull-ups, chin-ups, whatever. And then of course I take it up a notch and I add weight on these movements. So instead of doing bodyweight dips, I'm doing weighted dips. Instead of doing bodyweight pull-ups, I'm doing weighted pull-ups. Instead of doing bodyweight squats, I'm doing barbell squats, right? Or weighted squats, however you want to call them. You can call them big booty sissies or whatever. I don't really care. It's just, it's gonna grow your legs anyways. But it's kind of like doing calisthenics allows for me to cover all of my bases, right? It allows for me to hit all the big giant muscle groups with very simple and basic movements, without having to do anything complicated or without having to do much of like isolating, right? Or whatever the case may be. And speaking of adding weight to calisthenics movements, people will think that if you add weight, it's no longer calisthenics. People think like now it's just weight training. That's not the case at all. That's also a misconception, right? So what's happening is that you're still moving majority of your body through space. Doing a push-up and you're moving your body weight through space with some weight added on. But when you're doing a bench press, you're only moving the weight that's on top of you. You're not moving your body weight, right? So that's a misconception. I just wanted to clear that up before people think like, oh, is it really calisthenics if you're adding weight or, doing weighted calisthenics, right? Moving on from how I use calisthenics in my training, I'm going to explain how I use weights in my training, right? So weights is almost kind of like a supplementary thing, right? Most of my movements are calisthenics, right? Just about every single one of them, I use my body weight. But when I use weights, I kind of use weights as a form of quote unquote like supplementation. I use weights to isolate. I use weights to get those hard to reach areas that maybe some calisthenics movements can't get. It allows for me to hit my arms more efficiently, maybe parts of my shoulders that I can't really get with calisthenics movements, like, such as the medial delt or whatever. But there's other ways you can also work around that if you're creative enough. But if you just want to simplify things, then you should throw in weights for, these isolation movements in order for you to basically be able to, of course, like I said before, use the best of both worlds. With weights, I'm also to hit basically just one simple like big movement such as like RDLs or deadlifts, which is going to work my posterior chain so I can do hinges more reliably when it comes to barbell training or dumbbell training. So that's another way that I can use weights to kind of supplement my calisthenics training. So why do I combine both? Why do I bother to combine both, right? I'm sure that I can get efficient enough strength gain and muscle growth with just training with weights, or I'm sure that I can do the exact same just with calisthenics, right? But why do I decide to use both? Like I said before, calisthenics allows me to cover my bases. It is my ground level. It is my foundation. Calisthenics is my foundation. But like I said before, weights lets me train those kind of like hard areas to reach behind and, whatever. It allows me to kind of fill in the gaps that calisthenics might leave if you're not, reliably covering all of your bases, or if you want to kind of like fill things more out. Like maybe you just want to do calisthenics and that's fine. But if you want to kind of like maximize strength and muscle growth, then you probably would want to use weight training, again, like I said before, as a supplementation, which is why those things go well, very cohesively. Combining the two allows me to be a lot more engaged in my training. I find that I enjoy my training when I'm able to do certain movements on one day and other movements on another day. I can do weighted calisthenics on one day. I can do body weight, just an entire body weight session just another day. I can maybe only just use weights for a workout, whatever the case may be, however I decide to do things. And it allows me to kind of change up and switch up things without having to compromise my progression, right? Because I'm still able to do this, these exercises with the same relatively like movement patterns that hit the same muscles. So it allows for, just for more variation. It allows to keep things new and fresh. Another reason why, I'm doing calisthenics, if weight training can be so sufficient, calisthenics is fun. I love doing pull-ups. I love doing dips. I love doing push-ups. I love challenging myself when it comes to my body weight and just how I can move my body in new and creative ways. And speaking of calisthenics being fun, in general, it shouldn't be neglected. Some people don't find it fun. Some people might be too heavy. Some people might not be mobile enough. But the reason why is because you're not doing these movements enough, right? So in order to have like a well-rounded physique or well-rounded fitness, you should be including calisthenics as honestly the basis of your training. Many of your exercises, at least half, should be calisthenics based, right? And I say this because calisthenics is going to allow for you to be more athletic. You're going to be able to move your body more efficiently, right? Think of all of these bench pressers that, people that set the world record in bench. They have these huge, giant guts, bro. And like, do you think they can do a push-up? Do you think they can do reliably do 10 push-ups, right? Maybe they can, but it's just only 10 push-ups, right? And then how much range of motion are they getting? Their gut is probably touching the ground before they can even get a quarter way through the rep, right? So it's gonna kind of keep yourself in check, right? So that also plays into athleticism. You're of course not going to, it's hard to build a lot of fat when it comes to doing a lot of calisthenics movements because you're training so many muscle groups at once when you're doing these movements. So, such as doing push-ups and pull-ups, you're working a lot of muscles in your upper body rather than just push-ups doing your chest or just pull-ups doing your back. You're getting your core, depending on how things are engaged when you're doing push-ups. You might get some legs in there. Sometimes if I'm doing high rep push-ups, I might feel my legs, I might feel my glutes, I might feel my lower back a little bit because I'm holding this plank position for so long. If I'm doing pull-ups, sometimes I'll also feel my lower back. It feels like I'm stretching out my lower back. It feels like when I'm doing L-sit chin-ups, I feel my quads, I feel my hips and stuff like that. So when you're doing these movements right, you're going to be working so many other muscle groups, which is going to allow you to burn more calories. So that way, let's say when you're eating and trying to gain muscle, you don't gain as much fat, you're going to gain more quality. With calisthenics, there's many ways to acquire strength, right? So people usually think of, when it comes to the movements that they want to get strong at, they'll think of the big three, and that is squat, bench, and deadlift, right? So barbell squats, bench press, and deadlifts. And there's more ways to acquire strength and cooler ways, to be honest. So you can, instead of doing bench press all the time, you can mix in dips, right? You can mix in weighted dips. You can mix in weighted pull-ups. You should mix in weighted pull-ups, right? If you're gonna, at least stick to the big three, squat, bench, and deads, you should probably add in weighted pull-ups, right? Because that's gonna work more for your back. Deadlifts are not sufficient enough to work your back, right? And that kind of leads into my next point of why you should do calisthenics or why you shouldn't neglect it is aesthetics, right? So if you're a strength-focused person and you're doing weighted calisthenics movements, if you look at a lot of these street athletes, right, that they do weighted dips, weighted pull-ups, weighted muscle-ups, and they do barbell squats, right? Those are their competition lifts. And they are aesthetic, man. They're jacked. They look amazing, dude. They look amazing, right? And they focus on these big compound lifts. But they're not just doing deadlifts, right? They're not just doing squats and bench press. They're not doing bench press at all, actually, and they're not doing deadlifts at all, actually. But they're doing movements that are working a lot more muscle groups, especially the muscle groups that are responsible for becoming aesthetic, right? When you are working your pull-ups, you are getting your lats. You're getting your lats, which is responsible for the width of your back, right? And then of course they'll use more barbell-based movements for supplementation. But at the end of the day, their bread and butter are these weighted calisthenics movements, which is why they look great, which is why they look aesthetic and jacked without even having to do standard bodybuilding training. And speaking of kind of getting strong, doing the big three or, these street athletes, there's carryover. There's a lot of carryover to, doing calisthenics or weighted calisthenics to weight training, right? So a lot of people who do weighted dips and they're really strong in weighted dips, but they don't really bench, when they go back to doing bench press or, if they go and do bench press after a couple of weeks, they're going to be very strong in bench press, right? If you're at a body weight of, let's say, 180 and you're able to do dips for about, you're able to do like maybe like a 120-pound dip or something like that for like 5 reps, you're gonna be very strong on the bench press off rip almost, right? It's just gonna, you just have to learn technique for like maybe a week or something like that. But it's because there's a lot of strength carryover, and not just with like, you know, doing calisthenics to weight training carryover, but you're gonna also be able to have carryover in your day-to-day life, right? Again, calisthenics can allow for better athletics. So in your day-to-day life, you're gonna be a lot more efficient, right? You're gonna be a lot more stronger just moving your own body in your regular life, right? You're gonna feel a lot better. You're probably gonna be able to pick up things more easier, carry things a lot more easier, have a lot more work capacity and things like that. You know, you're gonna have like a lot more endurance as well. And going back to the point of like how weights, you know, how calisthenics can help with weight training, I remember just spending like my first year just doing calisthenics. And when I would go to the gym with my friends, I was pretty strong, or you know, at least stronger than them, in a lot of movements without really having to train for, you know, those movements. And there's a great amount of carryover. So definitely don't neglect calisthenics. Don't be dogmatic about which is better, which is worse, whatever the case may be. Combine the two. They're both amazing ways of getting jacked, of getting strong, of becoming just better at athletic, things like that. So don't neglect either of them. You know, if you want to just do one or the other, that's your own personal choice. But you should try and switch in between the two here and there, just to kind of like, you know, experience and see things differently and see what works for you. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please leave it down below in the comments. If you like the video, you can like and subscribe just to check out my other stuff and whatnot. And yeah, peace out.